Have any reason to dispute your dad's statement that he thought it was cool that he had had an accident with a celebrity?
Your Honor, I think if she's going to do this, she should show him the deposition because there's more to it than that.
Yeah, it's hard out of context.
Yeah, just a
So-
second. When there's an objection, I need to
The
rule on
objection
it.
was overruled.
There was a second objection.
This was just, do you have any reason to
I need to
dispute
rule
that?
on the second
Right.
objection,
So-
which is overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, sorry. All right, do you have any reason to dispute your dad's statement that he thought it was cool that he'd been in an accident with a celebrity?
I do not think it was cool. I cannot dispute whether or not my father thought it was cool.
Perfect. Okay. Now, nowhere on this does it say I'm hurt. True?
Correct.
And this link is important. Would you agree to know what was going on within hours of the accident?
Yes.
And we've asked for this link. Do you know where it is?
I do not.
Or what was posted? Have you ever seen it?
I can't answer yes or no. I'm sure I clicked the link. That would have been the logical thing.
And do you remember what it was?
No.
Okay. Now we can go to the top half. Your sister Shay has responded. This was her genuine response. Do you see it's about an hour and a half later, 9:32 on the date of the event? Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. Dad, I cannot believe how unlucky and how crazy this all is. I also can't believe this is all on GoPro. What are the chances? I'm so glad you're okay. How are you feeling this evening? All right. I cannot believe how unlucky and how crazy this all is. Do you remember receiving Shay's reply?
Yes.
And actually, as I look at that was not a trick question, but I can see you are actually not on this reply. Do you see your name isn't copied to all?
I maybe I've read that somewhere then because it looks familiar to me.
And I just realized it just now. Okay. By the way, your sister, just weeks earlier, had injured herself skiing. Is that true?
Correct.
Like 3 weeks earlier, she blew out her knee?
Tore an ACL and an MCL.
Those are knee issues, right?
Correct.
All right. What are the chances? Is that referencing that? Like the fact they have both gotten into ski collisions, or do you know?
I take it that way.
Okay.
I think it was like, it's February, we're both hurt.
And we're both unlucky?
Possibly.
Okay. I'm so glad you're okay. All right, Shay hasn't testified yet. But was it your understanding that on the evening of the accident, your dad was okay?
I think she meant that, he came out of it. I think it's her way of saying.
So let me ask you this question because it's pointed toward you.
Okay.
Was it your understanding the evening of the accident that your dad was okay?
Yeah, that not fatal. He was gonna be mendable. Maybe some rehab.
Well, that's a lot to say. Basically, are you okay, Dad? Did you ask him that day on the phone?
I'm sure I said, I'm glad you're down from the mountain. I'm glad you're here with us. I'm glad you're okay.
You believe you talked to him, right?
I believe I did.
Yeah, and
that's what it feels like. But
and your first question is, are you okay? All right, isn't that?
How are you doing, right?
Yes.
If somebody, I think for anyone that had gone through a big accident, it's that checking in with them.
And fair to say you don't recall him saying anything other than he was okay?
I think, as I mentioned, he said, I'm hurting. I think I have some broken ribs.
So you actually do remember the response?
This is my recollection. Maybe it's my sister saying, we think he's okay. He's got some broken ribs.
Now, the I'm famous, that that refers to my client, right? He's famous
think-
because he collided with a celebrity, right?
That's how I take that.
So he knew who she was by 8 p.m. that night.
Kind of looks that way.
Yeah. And do you have any idea where this link went? The link of the most important piece of evidence that could be presented at trial today?
It looks like it's somewhere out there in the cyber sphere.
Okay. Do you agree that your dad liked to be in the spotlight?
I agree.
This was pre-collision, right?
Yeah, he's big energy.
Now, I'm thinking back when my mom was 76. Did you notice things? This is pre-collision, so let's just say in the year before that. Dad's starting to get older. Did you think to yourself about that?
I never felt like my dad was getting older or that I had noticed something like that.
So when he's 68 years old, never considered like he's starting to get older.
By numbers, yes. And I have lots of people in my family that I've watched age. You know, my mother, my grandmother, my father and mother-in-law. I know what that's like, you know, my mom that can't remember the name of that author. But when there's a marked change in somebody's cognition, memory, and just functioning, it's more of a switch type feeling. It didn't feel gradual.
Do you remember the fact that your dad had a stroke contributed? First of all, did your dad have a stroke before the ski incident?
I'm not aware of a stroke. I know he had an occlusion with that lost some visibility in his eye. I think it's like a restricted blood vessel.
Do you recall in your deposition saying he had a stroke?
I think you called it a stroke in the eye, meaning
Did you call it a stroke?
if I did, I misspoke and I should have had an opportunity to correct that.
Well, you did have an opportunity.
I was not
correct it,
aware of
right?
that.
So I'll dig it out if we have to. Let's keep going. Your dad had an event where the oxygen in his eye, in his right eye, was essentially turned off, and he lost his right eye. Is that fair?
He lost some vision in his right eye, and you know, what are the odds for somebody that spent a lifetime committed to
Right.
eye health, right?
There's a reference to, he's an optometrist and he's not a medical physician, true?
He's an optometric physician, an optometrist.
So here's my question. Is he a medical physician, an MD?
No.
No. Okay, so now let's go through. A few statements here. I'll tell you what, I think this will be the most efficient way. A couple weeks before the ski collision, your dad went to a doctor, and he said he thinks all of a sudden he's gotten old all of a sudden. Did he ever express those sentiments to you?
No.
And it sounds like you never went to the doctor with him. Is that fair?
I did take him to appointments. I didn't sit in the room with his primary care provider and himself.
Pre-collision, did you take him to any doctor appointments?
No, not that I can recall.
Right. Okay, so, and you said, like, your dad wouldn't have told me that. For instance, of his depression, he wouldn't have told me. And is that just a little, like a sense of pride? I'm not going to share mental health information with my daughter?
I think it's more of his role as a parent. I've been involved in mental health care, and so we talk openly about mental health challenges. I think he has a little bit of, I'm the parent and I don't want to worry you. I don't want to bother you.
So my question was that like a sense of pride? I'm not going to share my mental health information with my daughter. Do you believe that or not?
Mr. Owens, I don't know that I would choose the word pride. I think I would say he didn't want to burden me as his daughter.
All right. So there's possible that he was doing mental health issues on the side without telling you. Fair?
I have not reviewed his medical records, so that is fair.
Okay. By the way, how long had you been out of the house in the time of the ski collision? So, like, had you been married 30?
At the ski collision?
Yeah, when did you move out of the house? After high school or after? Or
Yeah, so I left in 1992.
Okay, and we're in 16. 8 plus 16 is 24. You'd been out of
Good
the house
job.
24 years?
That's correct.
Okay. And you would see your dad maybe, let's say in the 3 months prior to the ski collision, do you agree you didn't call or see your dad once?
That was very surprising information to me after your team had pulled phone records.
Is that true?
I have no reason to believe it's not true.
And you would see him, did you see him about the same before the ski collision and after the ski collision? Like 2 to 4 times a year? Was
He
it about
said
the
it's
same?
been a little harder, especially with COVID. I don't feel like I've seen him as much.
Gotcha.
And part of it is, I still had kids at home, so it was easier to say, oh, we're going to come through on summer vacation. And
I'm with you.
yeah.
Okay. By the way, COVID was hard. Did your dad get COVID like twice in 6 months?
He did get COVID, I believe, more than once.
In like not too far, not like 1 month, but like 6 months or something. Does this sound right?
Does sound correct.
And that's extremely hard on him, just that. True?
COVID was hard on all of us. Yeah.
But in terms of some of the feelings of isolation, for instance, that's exacerbated by COVID. Fair?
Yeah.
All right. In addition to your dad's eye problem on the right, do you agree that he also was severely impaired on the left eye?
I would not agree with that.
All right. Let me get rid of the word severely. Do you recall him being impaired on the left eye prior to the ski collision?
Prior, no, I am not aware of that.
Do you recall him ever walking into walls?
No.
One of
Prior.
Correct. One of your sisters mentioned that. Do you know anything about that?
I have not experienced that, no.
That he would ask people standing on the right side of him if they would move so he could see them. Did you observe that ever?
Yeah, typically when we're walking, we would, yeah.
Okay. And just to be technical, so yeah doesn't work very well on the
Yes.
record. So there we go. Thanks.
Sorry.
Do you agree one of the reasons he retired was the stroke event that had left him deprived of oxygen in his vision?
I do not agree with that.
Okay. If your dad so testified in his own deposition.
Then I would go with my dad's. I have not read his deposition.
Thank you. Do you agree that he adjusted his skiing to the right side of the slope because of his vision issues?
I think that was typical. He would, yeah.
So that's a yes.
Yes.
And he had to be picky about which days he skied. Like if it was a snowy day with limited visibility, he wouldn't go because of his vision. Do you agree or disagree?
I don't know that. I think because he was retired, he would choose his ski days based on when it would feel the best day to ski.
So I'm just going to tweak my question a little bit. Did you know that he would adjust his skiing days based on visibility for that day?
I did not know that.
Okay. Let's talk about the prostate cancer. Do you know the severity? I guess they rate prostate cancers Gleason 6, 7, 8, or 9. Have you heard of this? 6, 7, 8, 9,
I think
10.
they were monitoring his numbers for a long time.
And 10 out of 10 is the worst. Are you familiar with the Gleason scale for prostate cancer?
I am not,
Okay.
other than that there is a scale, so.
And do you know if your dad was a 7, for instance? Not the least, but not the most?
I do not know. I've not reviewed my dad's medical records.
And separate then from the Gleason scale or his records, just did you understand, like, this isn't just the most minimal cancer, it actually had become malignant?
I knew they were monitoring his numbers, you know, so that makes sense that when they decided to operate, it was because the number had justified that decision.
Thank you. And I'm just going to restate my question. Were you aware his cancer had become malignant?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall how many years prior to the ski incident that cancer was?
I really do not recall. I would say surgery, if I had to guess, 2008.
One of the things they cut off was his testosterone. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And as a result, he became, in the records, quite emotional. Do you agree?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
We're dealing with his emotions.
Overruled?
Thank you. Do you recall him becoming quite emotional?
I did not experience that. More so after the accident. Much more notable.
Thanks. Let's stay pre-accident for a while.
Pre-accident, I never experienced the increase in emotion.
All right. By the way, after the accident, how long was it until you went and visited your father?
That's a great question. I think he was at my place end of May. I would imagine that summer at some point.
Okay, so the ski collision was in end of February. And so are you saying like 3 months?
He was at my house end of May, so I saw him again 3 months.
Okay, that was the first time you saw him after.
Yeah.
Right?
Typically, when we would come down, it would be like in July, so we would probably have seen him then. I can't review for certain.
Do you recall there being a motion regarding the prostate? So I'm sort of prostate cancer, so I'm separating the testosterone issue. I mean, that's a big deal, isn't it?
It is a big deal. I think he was scared. I think his father had similar issues, so he had kind of he had lived that experience, so he was concerned about it.
How old, by the way, was your dad's mom and dad? Are they both deceased?
They are.
And at what ages, do you know?
It's a good question. I think they passed away 2002, 2004. I would say maybe in their 80s.
70s?
Perhaps 70s, yeah.
And what did your dad's dad pass away from? Was it prostate?
I think it was complications with prostate cancer.
And your dad's mom, what did she pass away from?
She had broken a hip and then ended up getting pneumonia.
Let's talk about your dad's hearing for a minute. So your dad, about how many years ago did he start wearing hearing aids?
So my first memory of my dad with hearing aids, my younger sister was kind of an infant. And so, because I remember she would make noises and he kind of like, whoa, that's loud. So I think
Like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Ago?
Yeah.
40 years ago.
40 years ago, he's been wearing hearing aids.
Yeah.
And do you agree one side is worse than the other, or do you know?
I don't know that. I think technology's advanced. Hearing aids today are much better than they were 40 years ago.
And as far as severity of his hearing loss just prior to the ski incident, do you know? Can you quantify that at all?
So there are times, say, in the morning when we're brewing coffee and he doesn't have his hearing aids in.
Okay, let's
Right.
talk about when his hearing aids were in prior to the accident. Do you agree he still had some impairment?
Minimal, but yes.
He had to actually read lips. Do you agree?
I
think he's a people person, so he really does read lips and read people.
So pre-ski incident, even with his hearing aids, he read lips. Do you agree?
I think he does, not because he wasn't hearing, though.
Do you agree that part of his hearing impairment, even with hearing aids, was he couldn't hear high voices, higher frequencies, like a woman's voice? Do you know that?
I don't know that for certain, but I know that hearing loss happens in ranges, so that would make sense.
Okay, so we've talked about his eyes, his ears, his cancer. Let's talk about his heart. Do you recall that prior to the ski accident, your dad had some heart palpitation issues?
I was not aware of that.
Okay. Did you see any effects of aging in your dad prior to the ski accident? Any at all?
I think his hair was getting a little more gray.
Okay, anything else?
Oh, he seemed really pretty on target.
So perfect health prior to the ski collision?
I wouldn't use the word perfect, but I think for someone who was 69, he really worked at being healthy, took his supplements, made sure he exercised. He's a swimmer. He just worked hard at it.
He still swims, doesn't he?
I believe so.
Still goes to yoga.
He sure tries. He's dedicated to his health.
Post-ski collision, he went on like 10 international trips. Does this sound right?
I don't know if 10 is the number. He traveled quite a bit. I think he had a, I've retired, I'm supposed to do this kind of thing.
And did he ever do like international travel pre-ski incident? Did he do some of those?
Yeah.
And did he ever go alone?
Usually he traveled with a friend.
No one goes to Europe alone, do they?
I mean, it's good to have good company.
As part of the stroke workup, your dad had a lot of imaging done of his brain. Do you know anything about that?
No, I do not.
Do you know, for instance, if he was diagnosed with microvascular disease prior to the ski collision?
I do not.
How about moderate diffuse volume loss atrophy?
I do not.
All right. Do you know enough to talk about the fact that as we age, our brain's volume decreases?
I'm aware of that.
Do you recall that he was diagnosed with a plaque problem as a result of the retinal eye occlusion?
I did not.
Okay. Did you know he was, for instance, prior to the ski collision on an anti-cholesterol, anti-statin, I should say statin, of some sort of cholesterol plaque reduction medication?
I did not know it.
All right.
Wouldn't surprise me, though.
And if he was on like 7 to 9 medications just prior to the ski incident, I take it you don't know what any of those are.
I knew he took some medications along with his supplements. Like I said, he listens to doctor's orders. He would take what was prescribed to him.
Let's talk about supplements. Your dad loves supplements. Is that true?
I would say, yeah.
Like 40 a day, even before the ski collision.
I don't know the number.
Foundation.
He so testified in his deposition.
How would she know?
I think she's about to answer that. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just said I do not know the number of supplements he takes.
But is it like a whole glass full every day?
Objection, foundation.
If you know.
I have not watched my dad take his vitamins.
What do you know? Like how many supplements a day does he take?
So we'll talk things, like we were just talking about vitamin D, and I had said, I know it's better absorbed with vitamin K, and he said he did take a vitamin D, and I said, oh, you might want to look and see if there's K in it.
How about number?
I know he takes vitamin D. I don't know the number.
Would it surprise you that he said 40?
Objection, foundation.
Overruled?
Go ahead.
It would surprise me a little bit, yeah. I know he takes supplements.
You didn't, how about therapy so mental health therapy pre-collision. Were you aware your dad had undergone counseling for anger and other problems?
I was not aware that he saw a counselor for anger issues. I do know that he has seen a counselor for mental health.
So pre-collision, he's easy to anger. Do you recall that? VA 1131, Defense 113C. He's easy to anger. That's why he's going to see a therapist. Does this ring a bell prior to the collision?
Do I recall that? I have not read his medical records.
Angry, discussing family conflict. Do you recall this? This was back in 2009, so the collision was 2016, so 7 years earlier. Was he going through a divorce right around then, 09?
I don't think it was a divorce, but I think, did he split with his girlfriend in 08? So possibly.
Was his girlfriend issue. The patient desires to feel justified in his anger. Does this ring any bells, 09?
I didn't witness anger, no. Or he didn't display it. Maybe he had a self-awareness.
What do you know about like his breakup with his girlfriend in 09 in terms of emotions? Because we're talking a lot about emotions in this trial.
Yeah. Well, I know it was after his cancer treatment. So the year following. So I think he probably needed a lot of support and healing. And I don't think he felt like he got that from his current partner.
Okay, so he had an unsuccessful relationship with a woman prior to the ski collision, true?
That's true. He was working on that.
And he went through 2 divorces, true?
That's true too.
Had not remarried, right?
To my understanding.
And how many years went by between like the second marriage came right after the first divorce, true?
That's correct.
And then how many years went by after the second divorce and before the ski collision?
Let me check my math here. I would say maybe 10 years.
All right. So did he have any like life partners during those 10 years? We're talking about his relationships, for instance, in this trial. He's had a hard time like having long-term relationships after. And I'm just saying for those 10 years prior, did he have long-term relationships?
By long term, I can't think of sustainable. You had mentioned the one that had split in 2009, and I'm not sure how long they were together, maybe 2 or 3 years.
By the way, I don't know if we formally admitted D-113, but I would like to do so.
Any objection?
Don't know what it is yet.
We talked about it yesterday. Peter, do you mind?
What do you show, Jody?
I don't even show it.
No, it's an add-on yesterday. I'll keep going, but, well, would you prefer I keep going, Judge, or we deal with it right here?
It's your choice if you want to get it admitted now, or are you going to use the exhibit with this witness?
I don't know, but I do want it in the record because I'm referring to it.
Why don't we wait? We can handle it over the break, maybe, unless you need this witness or need to ask this witness about it.
I guess I will. So move for D-113F, which are VA, or excuse me, D-113, which are VA, stipulated VA records. Agreed or disagreed here?
We don't have the objection to the VA records. No objection.
Okay, defendant's 113 is received.
These records indicate that your dad had difficulty, the patient mentioned difficulty with anger management. Did you ever know your dad to have an anger management problem prior to the ski collision?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, what page is that?
113F.
What VA page is it?
Thank you. 1134. Second paragraph. So my question again, did you ever know your dad to have difficulty with
Oh,
anger?
sorry, just a second, Your Honor. I'm on 113, I don't see anything here.
Why don't you show counsel?
113.
I gave them a hard copy too. Okay.
Just, are you good to go, Mr. Sykes?
Where is it? Yep, where is it on here? Okay, thank you, Judge.
Did you did you ever know your dad to have an anger management problem?
I never knew my dad to have an anger management problem.
Okay. If it's in his medical records prior to the ski collision, I take it you don't dispute that.
They're his medical records, yeah.
He struggles with self-disclosure that is self-focused rather than other-focused. Did you see that in your dad pre-ski collision? He's so focused on himself rather than others.
I think he does have that tendency, or he did prior to the accident. It's after the accident, it's been magnified for sure.
Okay, so the answer is yes.
Yes, and more so after the accident.
The focus of this session was to help him identify his responses and the associated feelings and communicate those in less blaming ways. Did you know him to like blame others frequently pre-ski collision?
No, I think it's just great that he was trying to get tools. Yeah.
Well, he's getting tools because he has a problem with communicating with others that doesn't blame them. Did you observe that prior to the ski collision?
I don't think any humans are perfect, and he's acknowledging these are things I'm working on. That's how I understand that.
Okay, so I am trying to phrase these in yes or no, but I'm not going to cut you off. So I'm going to ask it again, though. Prior to the ski collision, did you observe that your dad had problems communicating with others because he would blame them? Yes or no?
No, I did not observe him blaming others. Yes. Yeah. I'll go with no.
Did you observe in the now 113H that his interaction style and way of dealing with people often got him in trouble
Pre-accident?
pre-accident?
No.
And he would like to gain greater insight into his interpersonal difficulties. Did you observe your dad pre-accident to have some interpersonal difficulties?
Yes, I think something he worked on.
But most people don't go 13 years without talking to like your sibling, right? That's more than just like most
I believe
people.
that to be true in my experience.
So we're talking. It's true everyone has interpersonal communication difficulties, but not everyone goes to their therapist for it. Do you agree?
I agree, but the smart ones do.
Patient had a number of recent stressors which he appeared to minimize. Okay, did you ever know your dad to minimize other stressors and focus on something sort of obsessively?
Not pre-accident, post-accident, yes.
Okay, how about that he would hyper-focus on a problem without dealing with broader issues that were affecting that?
I would say he does have a tendency to hyper-focus.
And that was pre-collision, right?
Yes, way more so after the accident.
Did his eyesight problem, hearing problem, heart issues, prostate cancer, did those somewhat narrow his abilities, his activity level?
I really didn't see that change or modify a lot. I think not till after the accident.
How about at all? Just like the 5 years before the accident? Any reduction in activities at all?
Right. I think I would see my dad, make some adjustments. Like he would learn because he's not reckless. So
Is that a yes or no? Reduction in activity level prior to the ski collision.
yes, very, very minimal.
And one of the things he told his doctor 3 weeks before the ski collision was he was not able to do the things he had been able to do. Does that surprise you?
Very much so.
Okay. You don't dispute the medical record 3 weeks before the ski collision, do you?
I would have a hard time disputing his records.
Migraines. He would have migraines pre ski collision, right?
Occasionally.
And they were debilitating when he got them. True?
Correct.
And he would actually have vision problem associated with his migraines. When he had migraines, he actually had even less vision. Do you agree?
I know he would typically look for a dark place, to just recover from that.
So your answer?
He was sensitive to light, and that would be visual.
Okay. Now let's talk about his back and spine problems pre-collision. He had a foot drop, didn't he? He walked differently pre-collision.
I wasn't aware of a foot drop or a different walk.
Do you know what a foot drop is?
Vaguely.
So you have to more drag one of your feet. Is that fair?
Okay, I didn't notice that in my dad.
You never knew of one?
No.
Okay. How about weakness or pain of loss of sensation?
Not aware of that.
How about he did have spine surgery? Do you agree?
I think he had, was it a compressed disc or something?
Right. That's not small-time medicine, right? Spine surgery is a big deal.
I would say yes.
Knee injury. Oddly, is this true? Before the ski collision, he actually injured his knee skiing. Does this sound familiar?
I vaguely remember meniscus, maybe.
Skiing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
There's inherent risks in skiing, knees being one of them.
So the answer?
Yes.
Did that require surgery? Do you recall?
I don't believe it did.
Shoulder problems. Do you recall having pre-ski collision shoulder problems?
I think he did have a shoulder issue.
And what do you recall about it?
Not very much.
Hamstring injury, a torn hamstring. Do you recall this pre-injury?
I do not.
Osteoarthritis. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes, I know what that is.
And were you aware your father had osteoarthritis prior to the ski
No.
injury? Trigger finger. Do you know what that is?
Yes, I do know that his thumb. He had issues with his thumb.
By the way, do you recall one of the reasons he has hearing problems is from shooting a lot of guns without ear protection?
In the military.
Have you heard this before, or am I the first to tell you?
Could have also been concerts, but I do know that he was in the military, so possibly.
All right. When he was young, he was a rocker. Is that fair?
If rocker, you mean like the Kingston Trio? Yeah, he was a rocker.
I think he told me he was a rocker in his youth. Do you know anything about that?
Well, he's in college like in the 68, so we're talking
All right.
Peter, Paul, and Mary, Kingston Trio. Like real rockers.
Still good music.
Yeah.
All right. Insomnia. Did you know him to have sleeping problems prior to the ski collision?
I knew that sleep was kind of a challenge for him. That's something that he shares with my older sister, Shay. And so they would talk about different techniques for getting a good night's sleep.
So did he have insomnia issues pre-collision?
I don't know if I would call it insomnia. You want to read me a definition for insomnia?
Sure. taking a medication for it.
Oh,
Did you know that one of the medications he took, like a lorazepam or Ativan or trazodone, I think he took all 3 of those at one time. Not at one time. I apologized, throughout the years before. So that's how I would define it, requiring prescription medication.
okay. So I would defer to my dad's medical record.
All right. Respiratory problems, were you aware your dad had respiratory problems pre-collision?
I knew that he kept an inhaler, that he'd had had pneumonia at some point, and so we felt like, yeah, I don't ever see him using the inhaler,
Okay.
but I knew he had one.
Your Honor, I object, doing this, going through the medical history of a 60-year-old person now for.
Looks like this.
It's irrelevant, and there has to be some end to this.
Okay.
We only have
Oh,
4 more days.
Yeah, overruled.
All right.
Each side's getting half time, so it's not affecting your time, Mr. Sykes.
Lower urinary tract issues. Perhaps those are prostate related. Do you know of anything about
Not
that?
aware of any of those.
Kidney problems. Do you recall he had some kidney problems pre-collision?
I do not recall that.
Like that he had chronic renal insufficiency? You've never heard that before?
No.
Cholesterol medication, what'd you tell me? You knew he was on a med for that, or you did
I
not?
didn't know he was on a medication for that, but that's pretty common for that age group, right?
And restless legs, were you familiar that he had that? That was a condition?
I think I was aware of that.
Did you and your sisters joke that like he's actually thinning the sheets because he kicks a lot?
It sounds vaguely familiar.
All right.
Counsel, you approach.
Yes?
Now. All right, we'll take a short break. Thank you. Okay, we're ready.
I do have a question for plaintiff's counsel. Is the jury, have they been summoned?
Why don't we wait?
I do want to ask a question of plaintiff's counsel. Because if they are, I'm going to spend more time with this witness.
We're not planning on it, so.
Okay, that will, I'm going to rely on that and shorten my testimony.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Owens, you may proceed.
Thank you. If your dad told the doctor 3 weeks before the ski collision that he was preoccupied with paperwork and cleaning things out and not doing things he enjoyed doing that he used to do, do you have any insights on that?
I do not.
Did you personally observe it?
I did not.
And how long had it been since you saw your dad prior? We said 3 months after the ski collision, but I'm not sure I asked you. How many months prior had you seen him?
I expect that we would have saw him either over the Christmas holiday
Okay.
or perhaps Thanksgiving. We usually did one or the other.
All right. So where the accident was in May, it would have been 5 or 6
Accident
months.
was in February.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm thinking it would have been
Couple months.
2 months, 3 months.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Was your dad sort of a scary driver before the ski collision?
I think I mentioned he was a multitasker, so he did more things in the car than I wanted my teen drivers to witness.
This is the first time I've ever seen this, but not just texting, but he would actually read a book while driving on the interstate freeway. Is that true?
I'd heard that rumor, like back when we were children,
From your
on a
sister?
straight stretch. I think that was something that.
From your sister?
Yeah,
That's bad judgment, isn't it? To actually read a book?
I wouldn't recommend it.
Judge,
I,
there's no foundation for
Yeah.
that judge. She doesn't have any personal knowledge.
Sustained.
Well, do you think that is bad judgment if your dad was reading a book, driving?
Judge, you just ruled on this.
Sustained.
It's a different question.
Go ahead, move on, counsel.
Thanks. All right. Your dad, our experts have actually compared brain imaging before the collision and brain imaging after the collision and have made various conclusions. I take it you don't know anything about that.
No advanced degrees in neuropsychology
All
or
right. And then your dad really received all of his health care at the VA. Is that accurate?
I think his primary care provider, he uses the VA.
I'm talking like lots of medical care and lots of specialties. Are you aware of that?
Like I said, I think he really values his health and has always, had those checkups and would not surprise me.
So pre-collision, like a lot of medical records.
I think there's a continuity there that runs his whole life, before accident, after accident.
So I'm waiting for a yes on any of these.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay. And they knew him best. Fair enough? The VA people?
Protection Foundation.
If you can answer the question.
I think it depends on if you have longevity with your primary care provider, and sometimes with the VA there's a lot of turnaround. They don't always stay a long time.
Do you know that he actually did have a long-term relationship with his primary care provider at the VA before this incident?
I don't know whether he did or not.
Okay.
I would be hopeful that he did.
Margaret Rasmussen. Do you know that name? Maybe I'm misstating it. Never mind, don't worry. Okay, then, so does this surprise you that your dad would go to the VA people and say, I want to be checked out. I want my thinking to be checked out. Did you ever hear him do that?
No, I did not.
Or that he had done that. That's how I should have said it.
I was not aware. I do
Okay.
know that he had follow-ups and healthcare visits, yes.
Did he ever tell you that he had had 3 neuropsych assessments at the VA through his current treating providers?
Pre-collision?
No, I did not mean to switch on you, thank
Okay.
you. That's a good clarification. So like 1 month after, 1 year after, 1 and 3 months after, that kind of thing.
I knew that he was having follow-ups because he was really worried about his mental state. So I haven't seen the medical records, but that seems, if that's what his medical record says.
And did you ever remember hearing from him or anyone else that they were all average to above average in like 20 different categories?
He did not share the response with me. I know he was doing a lot of work towards it, right? Cognitive work.
So you knew he was getting these assessments, but weren't you saying, hey, Dad, what are they saying? Didn't you do that?
I don't think I asked for medical, information, more about how are you doing? Do things feel less foggy for you?
Okay.
Are you more? You're doing it. I'm proud of you. Keep doing the work. Keep following up.
Post-collision travel. All right, so he would visit U.S. states like Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho. Do you recall all of those?
My sisters live in those states. I do, so yeah, I would say he did travel there.
And then, in addition, he went to Peru and walked the Golden Trail. True?
I
You know.
can't speak to that. I do know he went to Peru.
Okay. Do you remember, like, Machu Picchu? He went and visited Machu Picchu?
He did not share that with me.
Or
I would have done that if I was in Peru.
Yes. And that he floated down the Amazon?
Did not.
This is early 2017.
17?
So about 1 year after the collision. Do you recall how many weeks he was gone in Peru?
I think it was a couple of weeks, maybe.
Okay. And then Costa Rica, he did a zip line also the year after the accident. Do you recall this?
I was not aware he did a zip line, no.
How about Europe? Also the year after the accident. Do you recall he went to Europe the year after the accident?
So I recall in 2017, he had tickets to go with Robin. Then things fell apart with that relationship, and so he went to Europe with my younger sister, Jenny.
So the answer is?
Yes, I'm aware he went to Europe.
He went to the Netherlands and Germany and Switzerland and Italy and France and Belgium.
Correct. I believe so.
The Netherlands, he went there 3 different times. Is that true?
Sounds correct.
And that's the year 2 and 3 after the accident.
Okay.
You with me? Like you have to say, I can't testify. Do you know that?
I was not aware he had gone 3 times. I was aware that he had traveled to the Netherlands.
More than once?
Into my recollection, twice.
Okay. Morocco.
Yes.
He twice visited Morocco.
That sounds correct.
Canary Islands. This is the year after, 2 years after the accident.
That was the same time I went to Morocco.
And the Canary Islands, I don't even know where those are. I should know. If they're not on a risk board, I don't know my geography. Do you know where it is?
I would have to look at a map or an atlas as well.
Okay. Thailand. He visited Thailand 3 years after the accident. Does this sound
With his
right?
friend Boyd.
And each of these times he'd take pictures and with him smiling at all these great tourist spots. Do you agree?
As you do.
Yes.
Yes.
Big smiles in front of a Buddhist temple, for instance, right?
Yeah, we don't tend to post pictures of ourselves sad and in closets. No, we don't. We tend to.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Like Eiffel Tower, those Italy, the coast, all have big smiling pictures of Terry. True?
I haven't seen a lot of those photos that you're talking about. I think there were quite a bit of photos before the accident, too. I would want to make sure you could separate pre-accident, post-accident pictures.
Right, and you defer to your dad on that, right? If I asked him, like, does this state look right? And he says yes, I mean, he'd be the guy.
Possibly.
All right. So is it fair to say his travels did not suffer as a result of the ski collision?
Yes, you could say his travel companions might have suffered.
One clarification, Carlene, that's our girlfriend. I heard some comment that they were engaged, and then I never heard that from her, Carlene. To your knowledge, were they engaged?
I had never heard that word or fiance used. I think that was their intent and plan, but.
And then on the prostate cancer, I heard the word cured from plaintiff's counsel, but I actually never heard it from a witness. Do you know that, in fact, your dad is cured?
I cannot answer to that.
You've been very kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Mr. Sykes?
I have 1 second, Judge. Sure. Mr. Owens asked you about Sam Goldstein's comment about Terry being obsessed. Do you know why Terry is obsessed with this case? Do you know why?
It's the foundation.
I think my dad is very principled, and I think not only was he injured, but I think this accident really hurt in a way that it hurt him in a way that somebody would just not care for him when he was injured. I think that his brain injury, he really does become consumed with things. And I think feeling like righting this wrong for him has really kind of consumed him. And he wanted to make it right. He wanted someone to at least apologize or acknowledge or be held accountable for their decision on that day.
Okay. Do you have any experience in mental health? And if so, tell the jury what it is.
Yeah, so I managed a mental health and substance use disorder clinic for several years.
In the Coeur d'Alene area?
Yeah, in St. Mary's actually, for a FQHC there. So worked with people that were struggling mentally or with addiction. I ended up leaving just, during the pandemic. It got so that the demand was much greater than we could fill, and it was really a lot of people in crisis a lot of the time. So I thought I was going to just take a break, work with kids, get upstream a little bit, and feel like create some buoyancy. And I still might go back to working in the mental health field, but for now I like what I'm doing.
Now, you and your sister both went to the University of Idaho in Moscow, right?
All three of us.
Three of us. And so Shay was a senior, you were a freshman?
That's right. We were roommates. She was a senior. I was a freshman. That didn't work out so good. She was like, you need to be home by 10. You got homework to do. And I was like, wait, you're not my mom. But we got through it. Yeah.
Did Jenny ever come visit you over there?
Yeah, she did. And we went home every chance we got to.
Okay.
It was hard. Our parents were going through the divorce. So myself at 18 and Shay at 21, it really felt like we left our little one behind. So yeah, we went back every chance we got.
You were quite close to her, right?
Yes.
Tell the jury about Jenny's mental health problems.
So let me begin by just saying she's one of my favorite people. But yeah, as probably a young adult, she was diagnosed with mental disabilities. She is on disability now.
Objection. Just a minute.
Sustained?
Well, do you know this for a fact about her diagnosis? And how do you know?
I could, because I'm her sister and we communicate with each other, and I know she's on disability now.
Your Honor, my objection was sustained, and we're just pretending it
I'm
wasn't.
asking what she said. I'm saying,
Objection is sustained. The answer is stricken, and the jury should disregard the response. Go ahead, Mr. Sykes.
well, I need to be able to explore this because he did quite a bit. So, okay.
Up here for just a minute.
So, Your Honor, my objection is sustained. Yes.
Okay, would you tell the jury what your experience with mental health is in the clinic? What did you do there,
Yeah.
and what did you learn?
So we had 7 counselors and people that came in for, it would be outpatient mental health services, anything from
depression to anxiety to schizophrenia to whatever they were working on.
Your Honor, is this foundation for an expert opinion she is not allowed to give?
Will you approach the bench, please?
Your Honor, my objection was again sustained.
Yes.
And then I just requested an opportunity to put this on the record at some later date. I mean, some later time after the jury's gone. Okay? All right. Tell me the kind of things that Jenny...
I just don't want to take the jury's time with arguing.
Oh, yeah, we
back
understand
and
that.
forth. So
Yeah.
go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Sykes.
we don't want to hold them up either. Tell me some of the things that you discussed with Jenny on the phone. And when you had meetings with her, what are some of the things you discussed with her?
Are you talking about like just our phone calls and
Yeah.
our catching? Yeah, so,
Particularly with respect to your dad.
oh yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I saw her last month. I went over to Missoula for my birthday, and we took in a film festival, a documentary film festival together. So we got to visit a little bit about this upcoming trial. She was nervous.
This sounds like hearsay.
Sustained as to hearsay?
Well, not what she said, but just what you observed about her.
What I observed, I observed that she wasn't in a great mental place with us. She was
Expert opinion moved to strike. I think
as a sister, not as an expert.
Yeah, just a second. I want to hear the objection.
she was not in a good mental state. That's a
Okay.
expert opinion.
That's not
I
expert.
think she can offer a lay opinion under Rule 701.
Thank you, Judge. Go ahead. Offer your lay opinion, please.
Yeah, I was worried about her. I could tell that she was stressed out. She confided in me that her counselor had said,
You can't talk about what she maybe said
"Oh,
to
okay,
you,
all right,
but you're certainly able to talk about what you observed.
yeah." Her cat Potts wasn't doing really great. She was worried about her cat. She was worried about taking time to get here.
And those would be communications.
And that's something I can share or no? So something I observed.
You can't relay information that you obtained from her verbally.
Okay.
You can, what you saw when you were with her, you can
Right.
talk about that,
Right.
but not what she told you.
Okay. I just really enjoyed my time with her, as I always do.
Did she appear to be under a lot of stress?
Yeah, she had some, heaviness about her.
Over the years, as you've heard her talk about your dad, okay, have her complaints and observations always been accurate in your opinion?
I think
her mind, she has a creative way of seeing things. She was an art major. She's very visual, struggles with verbal communication. I think of everyone in the family, I do best with almost, I don't know if I can call it translating or interpreting and drilling down to what she's trying to say. There are times, though, when, and I don't want to speak for my other sister, Shay, but I can speak for myself when I've experienced that her understanding of a situation is very different than mine.
To strike that. We're getting it out of a lay perspective.
I think that is a lay opinion of.
You need to lay the foundation based on her
Speculation.
perception.
Okay.
So based on her reasonable perception, then it would qualify as a lay opinion.
Yeah, tell the jury, if you would, excuse me, what you've observed about her perceptions. Lay a foundation for us.
Yeah. I mean,
Lots of meetings, lots of telephone calls. You've talked about that.
yeah, well, we FaceTime quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like I said, she's very visual, one of my favorite people to walk with, because she'll say things like, wow, stop, look at that, look at those colors together, you know. She sketches a lot. She has a whole nother way of seeing the world that sometimes is
That's
beautiful.
an expert opinion.
She's
Do we
laying
have to
a-
keep dealing with this?
She's laying a foundation for her perceptions.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's really cool when you can expand your way of understanding, right? And we're always kind of myopic. Like I see things how I see things, and you see things how you see things. So what I appreciate about Jenny is that she has another way of seeing things. And sometimes that is really difficult. Sometimes with communication, things get twisted or confused, and there's a lot of clarification that has to happen often. And
Can we put on the record she is not here as a mental health expert, and she is not a mental health expert.
I think you can bring that out on cross-examination. This is a lay opinion of a sister about a sister and nothing more. Go ahead, Mr.
I'm
Sykes.
sorry you were interrupted. See if you can finish what your thought was.
yeah, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm an expert on anything. What I can speak to is the fact that I have had a relationship with her for 41 years. You know, she's kind of my first baby. I was 6 when she was born. So I can just speak to that relationship and growing up with her.
You were saying, I think you said she had another way of perceiving things. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think she has a unique way of looking at the world.
That's not always true.
Your Honor,
It's not always easy. Yeah.
Just a minute.
she can't make a credibility statement about her sister's thoughts.
Sustained.
Let me rephrase
And
that.
also sustained as to vagueness.
Okay. When you said another way of, I want to quote you correctly, another way of perceiving or understanding, you said that.
I did say that. I think
Now, what did you mean by that is my question.
it kind of comes back to Mr. Owens when I spoke with him earlier, and he was saying, so are you telling the truth or is she telling the truth? And I had a hard time answering that because I can speak to my own experience, but I am not in her lived experience with her, who she is, and I have not lived her life and her experience. I know her to be truthful. I've never heard her lie. So if she's communicating that to you, that is her understanding of the experience. Yes,
Right.
we have had times though when she has saw something that I have not seen, or I would portray it as differently than her.
Based on your knowledge of her in the past few years, okay, and your knowledge of her over the years as her sister and one who loves her, are her perceptions always accurate?
They're not.
Hold on one second, Judge. No further questions, Judge.
Thank you. Mr. Owens.
I understand Jenny to be a perfectly lovely, well-spoken person. Do you?
She's lovely. I would not use the words well-spoken.
Did you read her 136-page deposition?
Am I allowed to?
Of course you are.
No, I have not read her deposition.
Well, I don't know if you are, but I didn't give it to you. I'm just wondering. Does it surprise you that question and answering were perfectly eloquent? The whole thing, for like hours and hours.
I object, Your Honor. She has no foundation to answer that question, and that's just a personal opinion.
Sustained.
Does it surprise you that Jenny could talk eloquently for hours and hours?
Same objection.
Sustained, it sounds like counsel's testifying.
Okay. She has a bachelor's degree, right?
Whoa, it's hard fought, but we got there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is the answer?
Yes is the answer.
She, I mean, it sounds like I'm defending your sister here, and you're not. So let's kind of talk about it.
No, because I will.
Objection, Your Honor. That's improper.
Yeah.
Overruled.
You said Jenny is truthful. Yes?
I've never known her to lie. Intentionally lie, no.
So, if she says your father violated boundaries she set for years, you defer to her?
Objection, Your Honor. That's beyond the scope, and he's already covered that in his.
Overruled.
I would say that's something my sister has communicated to me, is that it's something she really practices with my dad, is healthy boundaries.
And both the other sisters do too, right?
Yeah.
Set boundaries, and sometimes he violates them.
I think
True?
all healthy relationships have to have boundaries. And yes, that has been, after the accident, definitely something that I struggle with my dad.
Is she telling the truth when she believes that your dad would exaggerate for money and celebrity?
Objection, Your Honor. That's beyond the scope. That's also, it's counsel.
Overruled.
She would be telling her truth.
I am winding up here. Is she telling the truth when she says he's deceptive?
Your Honor, I make the same objection. That's improper questioning.
I think we covered this before also, didn't we?
That's a new word.
Okay. Overruled.
I would say she's telling her truth.
Is she telling her truth when she says, I'm having a problem finding my quote on this. I apologize. Give me 1 second, please. He will get whatever monetary benefit he can in business, even if it's dishonest.
Objection, same. It's been gone through,
That's not a
And it's
quote, but it is a summary.
and it's totally irrelevant. It's improper questioning.
Overruled.
I don't know that to be true. Again, this is Jenny's deposition.
Is she telling the truth when she describes your dad as anal retentive?
I'm thinking that word came up with my older sister too, because she brought up that word, and I said, I don't even know what anal retentive means.
Jen?
What does anal retentive mean? So, if you're talking like type A, in order and details, I would say that's true.
Okay, so let me make sure we make sure we're on the same page.
Okay.
Is she telling the truth when she says he has anal retentive? He's anal retentive.
I would not call him anal retentive, no.
Okay, but both your sisters did, right? Shay said that too. Do you recall?
Shay said that the word anal retentive came up in her deposition, and I said it did not come up in mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't make it up.
Came from somewhere.
Okay, anal retentive has nothing to do with our bottoms. Is that true? Just to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
It's got the word anal in it.
I know. I don't like saying it.
Is that the definition?
I'll tell you what. I think it's obsessive, sort of. That's how I understand it. But and it is.
Sustained?
She asked me, but I'll be quiet.
Yeah, let's move on.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Sykes, anything else? Okay.
What's up?
And council, please approach. So you're done with your questioning right now.
I'm not done yet.
Oh, I thought you were.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You answered some of Mr. Owen's last questions, that she's telling her truth. Define that for us, please. What does that mean?
I think human beings move through the world and we have our own understanding and experience of things. I think there's a neurodiversity that exists in this world, and there are different ways of understanding and experience. Like I said, I don't know Jenny to be untruthful. I think she sees the world in a curious, different way.
But that's not your truth.
No, it's not my experience. Those are not my experiences.
No further questions.
Would she get it wrong that she didn't talk to her dad for 13 years?
I believe that is wrong.
Overruled? Overruled.
So, you think she can be wrong?
Yeah, that sounds wrong to me from my knowledge and understanding. So if you want to clarify, you're saying that after she moved out, she never saw my dad for 13 years?
We'll defer to her testimony, but whatever
Okay.
she said. Okay. Thanks.
I forgot to ask you one question. 2017, your dad broke up with
Robin.
Robin Dale, right? Okay.
That's beyond the scope here.
And she went to
Overruled. Go ahead and.
She went to he took Jenny to Europe with him, didn't he?
That's correct.
Did they have a good time?
No, it was miserable.
Miserable. Okay.
I think at some point she sent me footage where the bearing had gone out on my dad's wheelie suitcase, and it was just an hour and a half of him like spinning the wheel trying to figure it out. And when I said, "How are things going?"
Couldn't fix that post-accident, huh?
No.
Owens?
Your Honor, I'm going to put this on the record because I think I misspoke. With Jenny, you said that you and your father didn't speak for 13 years after you graduated from high school. We spoke.
Your Honor, I object to this.
I'm correcting my error. 'Cause I spoke in error. It says we spoke. It was just distant.
All right.
So I misspoke. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so you can step down. You're still under subpoena, and so you need to be available for any further for testimony perhaps later in the case.
Okay.
Thank you.
She was subpoenaed only for today.
Well, I guess I'm extending it by order right now then.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, thank you. I was just reminded, I'm sorry, Ms. Gresham. You're still under the witness rule, meaning that you can't watch the proceedings, you can't sit in here, and you can't talk to other witnesses about the case. Thank you. Mr. Sykes?
Well, confer with
Sure.
more learned counsel for just a minute. Your Honor, we're going to call Richard Boehm, medical doctor from Florida,
Okay.
by video because he had a wedding and could not come to the trial. And so,
A few minutes to set that up.
no, we're ready to go, but I mean, the jury might want a short break,
I think
5
we-
or 7 minutes, something like that, I mean, whatever.
I think we're okay if,
Anybody need a break?
it's only been it's been less than 30 minutes. Thank you. And counsel, for the record, would you spell that witness's name?
Boehm.
And that's an MD?
Correct. MD, PhD, biomedical engineer.
All right, thank you.
James.
My name is Lance Harrison. I'm the videographer. The court reporter is Rossann Morgan. We represent Depilmax Merit, located in Salt Lake City, Utah. The time and day indicated on the Zoom feed is 12:11 p.m. Mountain Time, March 13th, 2023. This is the case of Terry Sanderson versus Gwyneth Paltrow, case number 190500048 in the 3rd Judicial District Court, Summit County, State of Utah. Counsel will now introduce themselves and the court reporter will swear in the witness.
Lawrence Bueller for plaintiff Terry Sanderson.
James Egan for Gwyneth Paltrow, the defendant.
With me is also Robert Sykes.
I don't know, just myself, if I can ever get this thing turned on. Okay, Robert Sykes, also counsel for the plaintiff.
Doctor, can you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I do, Madam Court Reporter.
Thank you. Go ahead, counsel.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Dr. Boehm, could you state your name and spell it for the record, please?
Certainly. My name is Richard Boehm, and that is spelled B-O-E-H-M-E.
Okay. And I'd like to just get some background and educational information. So where were you born?
Huntsville, Alabama.
And where did you grow up?
Huntsville, Alabama.
And next, I'd like to hear about your education, starting with high school and then through universities, undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate school. Thank you.
I graduated from high school in Huntsville, Alabama, and went into the Navy. I graduated with honors with a Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy. I did my postgraduate work in nuclear engineering, and I served on board a number of nuclear submarines in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear trained engineering officer.
Any way we can turn it up, I would love.
During the application process in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear trained engineering officer, I resigned my commission to apply and go to medical school. During the application process, I worked as an advanced design aerospace engineer for the Morton Blackhawk Corporation on the Star Wars project back in the 1980s. I matriculated into medical school at the University of Alabama School of Medicine in Birmingham. While I was there, I took a leave of absence to complete my PhD in biomedical engineering. And after I was conferred the PhD, I went back and completed the MD. And after I was conferred the MD degree, I went back on active duty in the Navy, and I conducted my internship in general surgery and my residency training in neurology at Bethesda Naval Hospital located outside of Washington, D.C. While I was in the Washington, D.C. area, I worked at the Naval Undersea Research Laboratory. I taught the postdocs until my retirement in 2005. I became board certified in adult neurology, and I completed fellowship training in neuroradiology while I was in the Navy. I currently have a private practice in neurology in Jacksonville Beach, and that's about it, guys.
Okay. Can you explain your education more specifically in neurology and biomedical engineering?
Sure. Neurology is a subspecialty in medicine where the physician of record deals with patients that have disorders of the central, peripheral, and autonomic nervous systems. A biomedical engineer, well, the biomedical engineering field is a very broad field that brings the disciplines of medicine and engineering together. It ranges from genetic research to the design and implementation of artificial limbs and joints, monitoring equipment in the hospital, heart-lung machines, materials used for artificial limbs, teeth, these types of things. My particular specialty within the field of biomedical engineering is the study of complex fluid flow and the study of externally applied force application to the human.
That was.
I'm sorry, doctor. I just missed that last part.
The study of externally applied force application to the human.
Got it. To the human. Thank you. Sorry.
You're welcome, sir.
Now I'd like to move on to training as a neurologist. How many years have you been practicing as a neurologist and training in neurology?
Over 30 years.
And what about how many years as a biomedical engineer?
I would say about the same period of time. I did that work in the Navy starting on or about 1989, so I guess that would qualify as 30 years.
Okay. Can you describe your hospital and clinical work?
Sure. I have hospital privileges at the St. Vincent's and Baptist Health Systems here in Jacksonville, Florida, which comprises 5 different hospitals. And then I have primarily an outpatient clinic in neurology, and I see patients 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And neurology patients comprise primarily of headache patients, trauma patients, patients with stroke, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, peripheral neuropathies, these types of things. So That's what I deal with on a daily basis.
How many times have you testified in court as an expert witness?
A lot. I would say over, well, in the private sector, it's over 100 times. When I was in the government, I used to testify on behalf of the government, i.e. the Navy, at different tribunals and that type of stuff. And I don't know the number of that, probably less than 50.
Are you compensated for your time as you prepare for and testify in court?
Yes, I am.
And what types of cases in the private sector do you testify?
Well, I get involved in what we refer to as personal injury cases, i.e. patients that have some type of medical malady as a result of an externally applied force application to some part of their body. I get involved in medical malpractice cases and also in product liability cases.
Okay. Does that include head trauma?
Yes, it does. And also, to be complete, every so often now that I'm retired from the Navy, I do get a government case from time to time. I would say maybe once per year.
Okay. I'd like to move to your professional specialties and interests. Other than what you've described, are there any other things like patients or brain injuries in general or concussion victims that you have specialties or interests in?
Well, I see patients that have closed head trauma, that have concussion symptoms ongoing, if you will. So I hope that answered your question.
And that is how it's done by a neurologist, correct?
Well, yes. I mean, some neurologists elect to specialize their clinic in certain disorders, if you will, but I don't. I'm more of a general neurologist. So in addition to the trauma patients, I see the other patients that I've already described.
Okay. What about your professional specialties in biomedical engineering? Anything else that you can tell us?
Well, I did that work in the Navy, and then when I came into the private sector, I got involved in the three types of cases. Well, actually, the two: personal injury and product liability. Medical malpractice deals with just neurology, but product liability cases, i.e., if a particular medical device fails for some reason, then I get called in to assess why it did that, if it in fact did do that, if you will. And then, of course, the personal injury aspect of it. This would be one of those types of cases.
Okay. So you mentioned personal injury. That would include closed head brain injury?
Yes, and spinal cord injuries, these types of things. Anything that involves the nervous system, and keep in mind that we have nerves that go to all parts of our body.
What is a closed head brain injury?
Well, closed head injury just means that the externally applied force to the head did not open up the head, i.e. you don't have an open skull fracture or anything like that. An example of an open head injury would be like a gunshot wound to the head. That would be an example of that.
Is that the same as a TBI or traumatic brain injury?
Well, closed head trauma just describes an externally applied force application to the head. Now, what it does to the brain, if you have any type of dysfunction of brain activity after the force application, we refer to that as a traumatic brain injury.
What is an MTBI?
M just means mild traumatic brain injury.
And what about post-concussive syndrome?
Post-concussion syndrome is just a description of a group of symptoms that make up a syndrome. Post-concussion implies that there's been some type of externally applied force application to the head that results in some type of brain dysfunction. And in classic terms, a post-concussion or a concussion is in fact a mild traumatic brain injury. However, you need to qualify that whether or not the concussion is permanent or not. Most concussions, most people that have concussive-like symptomatology from a blow to the head, the most common of which is a headache, will resolve quickly over time. And the trauma literature is pretty specific in this description. 95% of people that have a closed head injury that have concussive symptomatology resulting from that will return back to their baseline normal within 1 year, 95% of the time. So that still leaves 5% of those that don't. So you have to qualify whether or not the concussion or the concussive symptomatology is permanent or not.
Okay, regarding the group that does not recover within a year, what are the problems that typically persist?
Well, keep in mind that your brain is your whole being. So you can have any type of symptom relating to brain function. Keep in mind that the study or the field of neurology was learned stroke by stroke. So to give you some examples, if you lost eyesight as a result of a blow to the head, that would be a brain injury because you lost your eyesight. You can have paralysis, you can have double vision, you can have vertigo or imbalance, you can have hearing loss, you can have disorders of mentation, such as memory loss, intermittent confusion. The most common symptom after a blow to the head would be a headache. So people will describe different types of headache syndromes as a result of blow to the head.
Okay. In your career, about how many adults of Terry's age have you treated or evaluated for brain injury? Terry was 69 at the time.
Well, I don't keep track of that data. It's been quite a few, I would imagine, over time. Our neurology group was the group that provided neurological services to our professional football team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, for a couple of years. So in the younger population, we saw it all the time, but in that particular age group, it's going to be less common because the prevalence of closed head injury in elderly individuals is less, with the exception of patients that have Parkinson's disease. People with Parkinson's disease lose their ability to control their center of gravity, so they have a tendency to fall. And also they have a tendency of not being able to protect themselves when they fall, i.e. put their hands in front of their face. So we see a disproportionate amount of patients that have Parkinson's disease that end up falling, striking their head on the ground, and then having any varying degree of brain injury as it relates to that fall.
We've asked you to review the case of plaintiff Terry Sanderson. I'd like you to explain what you have reviewed and relied on in this case. For example, did you meet with Mr. Sanderson?
Yes, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Sanderson in my office on April 28th, 2021.
And what was the primary reason you were asked, or you asked to see Mr. Sanderson?
Well, whenever I get involved in these types of matters, I insist on seeing the patient for two reasons. To get there, keep in mind that the patient is the repository of all information from which a healthcare provider is going to come up with a medical differential diagnosis and ultimately a final diagnosis. So you got the source in front of you, but also I had the medical records. So I was able to corroborate the medical records with Mr. Sanderson and then get his description of the events leading to his condition. And then, of course, I performed a physical examination on him as well.
Okay. What were the medical records, as you recall, that you reviewed in this case?
Fortunately, I have them listed here because I don't commit all this to memory. I have the incident report from the actual event, the Park City Instacare, that's like an urgent care facility. I have the VA medical records. I have imaging, x-rays and a CT scan. Then I have Dr. Goldstein's records. I have Dr. Wendell's records, or Dr. Wendell Gibby's records, that is. Dr. Alana Fong records. And then I have numerous deposition transcripts. And that includes a Mr. Ramon, a Ms. Gresham, Sanderson, Harath, Davidson, and Smith. And then I have deposition testimony from Mr. Sanderson, a Ms. Paltrow, and Eric Christensen, Sam Goldstein, and Dr. Fong. And so those are the materials that I reviewed.
What do you recall about Miss Carlene Davidson, the former girlfriend of Terry Sanderson?
Well, that there was a significant change in Mr. Sanderson as it relates to the incident back in 2016.
Some of these depositions or these witnesses, we call them before and after witnesses. Is that your understanding?
Yes, it is.
What is the significance to you of the before and after witnesses that are that you reviewed in this case?
Well, there is a type of patient that we see commonly in our practice that may not give us a consistent or inconsistent history and may not have insight into their own problems. And I'm referring to patients that have like dementia, these types of things. And so the healthcare provider has to rely upon witness history from close observers, like a family member, a spouse, a coworker, to get the history. This is one of the problems that we have as neurologists, especially with patients that we're initially evaluating for Alzheimer's dementia. It is almost universal that it is a loved one or a close associate that brings that patient in for evaluation, where the patient has very little insight into the problems that are seen by others. So witnesses can be exceedingly helpful in obtaining historical information on a patient.
Does Terry Sanderson have Alzheimer's or dementia in your opinion?
No.
What is the importance of some of these before and after witnesses whose depositions you reviewed to your understanding of the problems?
Well, if you have a situation where there is brain dysfunction from a specific event, i.e. there's a stepwise decline in functioning, and it doesn't have to, it's any type of functioning, the close observer is going to be in a position to be able to relate the change or the magnitude of the change in the symptoms in the patient at hand, whereas the patient may not be able to express those changes to the healthcare provider. So before and after witnesses can be exceedingly helpful in those types of cases.
And you understand Terry Sanderson was involved in a ski crash, correct?
That's correct.
So do you recall reviewing records by and the deposition of Whitney Smith, a ski patroller at Deer Valley?
Yes, I do.
Okay. We'll get to that later. I'd just like to go through the list of things that you reviewed.
Sure.
Next, did you review some of the defense expert reports, the reports that were produced by the defendant, Gwyneth Paltrow?
I did see some correspondence relating to those reports, yes, and I reviewed those.
Okay. Now I'm going to share my screen and show you the it's Plaintiff's Trial Exhibit 1. Just give me a second. And this is the Deer Valley Resort Company Incident Report Form. Do you see that at the top?
Yes, I do.
And it's dated February 26, 2016. You see that too.
Yes, I do.
Do you also see that it indicates the incident or the time was 12 o'clock? I assume noon because...
Yes, it's noon. I'm not familiar with night skiing.
There is night skiing, but not at Deer Valley, I don't believe, and not that late. And it involves Terry Sanderson. And I'm just going to highlight a few things. Well, it's not letting me highlight. Let's see if I can highlight it here. Oops. There it is. Now it is. Do you see that blue highlight?
Yes, I do.
It says it's under insured's description of the incident, correct?
Yes.
What does it say?
I think it says injured.
Was hit from behind.
Okay, I'm going to go to page 2 of Exhibit 1. And do you see under, next to the question, what did you do? I'm going to try to highlight it, but can you read that for the record, please?
Certainly. He was assessed to have a mild disorientation and rib pain on the right side, and then he was transported via toboggan to the screening facility, I would imagine. And then on reassessment, he was still disoriented.
Okay.
I'm just going to register an objection to the degree that that did not read into the record exactly what is written in that answer.
Okay. Yeah, what is the, why is that, what we just reviewed in this Exhibit 1, why is it important? Does it confirm head trauma and broken ribs, you believe, for example?
Well, the clinical description of rib pain certainly is consistent with fractured ribs on the right side, which was later determined. And the disorientation tells me that he did not have volitional, meaningful interaction with this environment. So there is an element of loss of consciousness involved here.
And what is the significance of loss of consciousness?
Well, a loss of consciousness is certainly dysfunction of the brain. I mean, obviously, people aren't on a ski slope unconscious unless something happens to them. So this is certainly an aberrancy of brain function.
Okay. Just to go through the exhibits at the beginning instead of later, I'm going to go through another exhibit. This will be plaintiff's trial exhibit number 4. And do you see this exhibit 4?
Yes, I do.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind looking at that, and in particular the report that I just highlighted in blue.
States he lost consciousness and ski patrol responded.
Okay. What is the significance of this report, which apparently occurred the same day as the ski crash, to you? What does this mean as an expert?
Well, it's just documenting what happened to him. So he had a loss of consciousness.
Okay. And like I said, I'm just going through these to make sure you're familiar with them, because I'd like to discuss what they mean to your opinions, or to form your opinions. Next, I'm going to show you trial exhibit 5. Do you see this exhibit? And if you
Yes,
could, please describe it.
It's a progress note and from the emergency department, and the visit was February 27th. And then his chief complaint was a ski accident yesterday with positive LOC, which means loss of consciousness, for approximately 5 minutes. He states he has a slight headache today and being more irritable, and he is also complaining of right lateral rib pain that is worse with inspiration, i.e. breathing, and he denies any neck pain.
Okay, again, why is this record important to your opinions?
Well, it's consistent with what happened with yesterday, and he still has the right, the rib pain. So it's just consistent with the history that was previously given.
I'm just going through is there anything about this record that you think is important to discuss about your opinions today?
Well, it's just the history.
Judge, I think some people may be having trouble seeing that. I wondered if we could have permission to have them move up to the front or something so they can see it if they want, because it is a little bit small.
Are any members of the jury having a difficult time reading the exhibit, or any of the exhibits? If you are, please, you can move to these closer chairs, or you can certainly walk around front. Feel free to do that. Okay? All right.
He basically had an unremarkable exam. And the history tells the story.
Okay. Finally, I'm going to show you Exhibit 7, which is the last exhibit we'll show right now. And can you describe this Exhibit 7?
It's a progress note from February 29, 2016.
And where I've highlighted, um, oh wait, not the, that's too much. Well, let's see if I can. Okay, the part that's highlighted, what is the significance of that?
Once again, is the history. Mr. Sanderson did comment on his injury sustained on the 26th, where he had loss of consciousness after a skier impact, and he has been experiencing foggy feeling along with mood change.
Yeah, I believe this record, well, I may have to return to one of the other exhibits. I think it's exhibit 5. That's the longer one. And in particular, I'd like you to look at the page 4 of Exhibit 5. And are you able to see this record?
Yes, I am. It's a radiology report.
Can you explain the significance of this record?
Well, it documents the injury on the right side of his chest, responsible for the pain and increased pain when he was breathing. And basically it shows under impression acute fractures of the right 4th through 7th lateral ribs with minimal displacement of the 4th and 6th ribs.
So does this mean he broke 4 ribs in this ski crash?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
A good place to take a last break. Okay, let's take a short break and then we'll come back for the last session.
I rise for the jury.
It's a 2-hour, 2-hour 19 minutes.
One more hour left.
Well, think we'll make it? Yeah. Okay, well, we may, that'd be great.
Well,
Got it.
there's
Make it
another,
quick.
well, actually, there's another.
Move faster, though.
I assume there are no objections to rule
There's
on.
actually, there is another piece to this.
Okay,
Well,
I have longer.
if an objection wasn't made, it's waived, right? It's trial.
right.
Yeah, we've
Why
already
don't you try
said,
and send that?
we've already said we can watch the whole thing.
jury's on their way. Yes. So the jury's agreed to stay late to finish this, according to the bailiff?
It's, the whole thing is about 2 minutes, 2 hours and 19 minutes.
Yeah, and there's another part to this video.
If they could stay,
Never mind then, we'll just stop at 5.
yeah. I wouldn't mind, but I think they would be a little surprised.
Yeah, I misspoke earlier because I was just going off this video.
I was also.
Yeah, I forgot there was a second.
They broke it up when we took a break for the last 3-4 weeks. I mean, we're happy to go without any cross, but we think it'd be unfair.
We wouldn't mind.
And then I'll want to go over our witness lineup for tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's very simple.
Go ahead. Shay
Harith,
Mark,
Harith,
yes,
Terry Sanderson,
yes,
and Gwyneth Paltrow if there's time.
okay. So Terry first before Gwyneth.
And I want to put you on the witness stand and ask you a few questions about shady trial tactics. Is that okay?
Anal.
All right, thank you. Thank you, members of the jury. And I know I had the bailiff talk to you about timing, and the lawyers have informed me that we were all wrong about this, and it's going to take a little longer, so we will break at 5 or a few minutes after 5 today. So, thank you. You may proceed, counsel.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that Exhibit 5. Sorry, I took it off the screen. There's another report. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Another radiology report. Can you tell us what that means to you?
It's a radiology report of the CT scan of the brain without contrast.
And what are the findings that you see?
Well, the pertinent findings is that there was a prominent ventricular system enlargement with associated atrophy or shrinkage of the brain, if you will. And there was, more importantly, there was no evidence of a hemorrhage or a brain bleed on the CT scan since he was experiencing symptoms consistent with a concussion. So obviously you want to rule out some type of in the brain. You do that with, in an emergent setting, you do that with a CT scan, which was done here. So basically, from a traumatic standpoint, there was no abnormal findings, i.e. like a skull fracture or bleeding within the brain.
When you say emergent, that means emergency?
Yes, I mean, most emergency rooms are equipped with a CT scan for that reason, to look for fracture and hemorrhage. So if you really need something more than that, like an MRI of a particular anatomical structure, then usually that's scheduled on an outpatient basis.
Down below under impression, number 2, it says, I'll let you read it. Oops, I'm going to try to highlight this. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
In your own words, can you explain what this means?
Well, the prominent ventricular system discordant with mild volume loss suggests an anatomical finding of NPH, which stands for normal pressure hydrocephalus. And it says in the appropriate clinical setting. So you have to clinically correlate these findings with the patient.
Does this mean, Doc, was this number 2 that you just discussed, is that related to the ski crash injury?
No.
So you had one clinical interview with Terry Sanderson, correct?
Yes, it did.
And that was in your clinic.
Yes, it was.
How did you clinically assess Terry's TBI symptoms?
Well, basically, they are mild, if that's what you're looking for. But basically, he has an ongoing, from his history, he has an ongoing post-concussive symptoms.
Does mild mean that it's insignificant?
No, not necessarily. It depends on the symptoms. Like I said, your brain is your entire being, so someone can lose, for example, eyesight in one eye, but if you're a surgeon, then you're done, if you know what I mean. But if you engage in other activities, you could probably continue on with just monocular vision. But for a surgeon, you really need both eyes to perform surgeries. And that would be an example.
So how did you corroborate that Terry Sanderson had a TBI, or traumatic brain injury?
Well, from his concussion. A concussion defines a TBI, traumatic brain injury. So it's like I said before, the issue becomes whether or not the symptoms are permanent or not. And that's where his medical records, i.e. ongoing medical care by his treating physicians and the so-called before and after witnesses come into play to corroborate the time course of those symptoms.
Okay, next I'd like to ask you about your opinions in this case, especially those involving the injuries he suffered and what they mean from the ski crash of February 26, 2016. So first I'd like to address the concussion. What are your opinions regarding the concussion?
Well, that he sustained a concussion, and that came from the closed head trauma from the ski accident.
What are your opinions as to the cause of the TBI?
Well, basically his head struck the ground, and that would be the force application that would result in the closed head injury, resulting in the TBI.
What are your conclusions or opinions regarding the rib fractures?
Well, that, once again, that came from his contact with the ground. From the ski accident, that is.
Okay. Well, based upon your biomedical engineering and the physics, tell us what this can indicate regarding the cause of his fall to the ground.
Well, the falling to the ground resulted from his center of gravity being shifted outside of his torso. So he had it drew him to the ground. And so the question becomes, what caused that shift in his center of gravity, causing him to fall to the ground? And that was, since he fell to the right side, that was an impact from, or an externally applied force application from his left side. And that's what caused it.
Okay. Now, does this indicate that Terry Sanderson was hit from behind?
Well, yes, it does. I mean, if, you got a witness saying that he was struck from behind, but suffice it to say, the force application came from behind and from the left side, causing him to go over onto his right side. And that's where that impact did not result, that first impact did not result in rib fractures or concussion. It was his contact with the ground that resulted in the injuries that we see in the medical records.
Okay. Can you explain how your understanding of force application show this?
Well, the biggest thing is that when you fall to the ground and you have evidence of rib fractures on the lateral side of your torso, then obviously there was a force application directly to the ribs in that location. And so when you fall to your right side, your elbow or your arm gets in the way between your chest wall and the ground. And so the hard object would be you, i.e. your arm and elbow, making contact with the ribs, resulting in the rib fracture. And then very, very shortly after that, then you strike your head against the ground as well.
Does this explain or show that Terry Sanderson was hit from behind by Gwyneth Paltrow?
Well, I don't know who, I guess it was her that struck him, but yes, it does show that he was struck from behind and went forward to the right, causing those injuries upon impact with the ground.
Well, can you walk us through the engineering and physics, unless you've already explained it?
Well, well, you can put numerical values on this because we are subjected, everyone on this planet is subjected to the Earth's gravitational pull. We refer to that as gravity, and that is 1G. So it attracts us to the Earth. So we as humans, we maintain primarily an erect posture. And so if you shift your center of gravity where that outside of your torso, you have a tendency to fall unless you're holding on to something. So you will fall to the ground, okay? And so you can calculate the time it takes to fall to the ground for different body parts that, depending on his height. And so you can appreciate that when you fall like this, your ribs are located around here, your head's up here, so actually your ribs are going to hit first and followed by your head. But it takes a certain amount of time to do that, and that's, falling basically like a free fall, if you will. So it takes less than a half a second for that to occur. And there's a term we like to use in physics called kinetic energy. And when you calculate the kinetic energy over a distance, we refer to that as work done. And so you can calculate the kinetic energy that's imparted upon different body parts, knowing where those body parts are and how they struck the ground. And so in Mr. Sanderson's case, the history from witnesses or a witness was that there was a person on top of him that fell to the ground along with him. That would impact the force application to his ribs, but not to his head, okay, because the person wasn't sitting on his head as he fell to the ground. So when you do the calculation, it turns out to be about 4,000 newtons of impact force to the ribs, which is enough to cause a rib fracture. And that's consistent. Now with the head, that's a different calculation as well for obvious reasons, because the mass of the head is much different than the mass of Mr. Sanderson with Ms. Paltrow on him as he's falling to the ground. So when you do those calculations, and keeping in mind he was also wearing a helmet, and so that helmet serves to absorb some of the energy transferred to the brain. So when you strike the ground, you have a kinetic energy calculation as well. And so you determine the velocity, you know the mass of the head, and you know the distance between the brain and the outer scalp, and the distance of the helmet is about 2 inches. So that all comes into play. Now keep in mind, if he wasn't wearing a helmet, the force application to his head would be much higher. In fact, about 3 times higher. So the helmet did serve its purpose of absorbing some of the blow, if you will, in layman's terms. But that calculation turned out to be about 240 newtons of impact force. And that is assuming that he fell on level ground. Now, I understand that ski slopes have some type of incline. I don't know what that is in this particular case. Any incline would make the calculation more severe because he would have fallen further. And so the distance traveled on a fall increases the velocity, which is proportional to the square of the velocity. The kinetic energy is proportional to the square of the velocity in these types of calculations. For all intents and purposes, fall to level ground with 240 newtons of impact force to the brain.
So the newtons are the force that was applied, a physics term, correct?
Yes, it is a physics term, and it is the force application to the brain.
So the force that was applied, let's start with the ribs first. And on the right side, indicate that Mr. Sanderson was hit from behind or the side, and with Ms. Paltrow landing on top of him, that shows that it's much more likely than not that he was hit by Ms. Paltrow.
Well, he was hit by someone from the side and from behind. Keep in mind that that person also landed on him. So it's usually people that just fall to the ground, do not suffer rib fractures. And the reason being is that there's not enough energy being transferred to the rib. It takes something else, and the something else would be someone falling with them on top of them. And that would certainly be enough to do it, yeah, at least in this case, assuming that a person weighed around 130 pounds. That would certainly be enough force to do that.
So the rib injuries, would you use the analogy that they're kind of like looking at the bumper of a car that was involved in a rear-ended collision where another car rear-ended the car, and they help show what the injury might be and how it was caused?
Well, the rib injury really depicts how the injury occurred, what happened, not the head trauma. The head trauma was just a result of the fall. Okay, I mean, that's independent of anyone being on top of him, you know, falling to the ground. The fact that he fell to the ground and struck his head is responsible for the head trauma. The ribs tell us how it happened because there's only really one way in this particular scenario that there could have been enough force application to fracture those ribs. Now, if there were no rib fractures, you wouldn't be able to say how this fall occurred.
So does this indicate who hit whom?
Well, yes, if you had a choice between Mr. Sanderson hitting Miss Paltrow or Miss Paltrow hitting Mr. Sanderson, you would have to pick Miss Paltrow hitting Mr. Sanderson from behind and falling on top of him to account for the rib fracture.
I'm sorry, say that again?
If you were to compare two scenarios, Mr. Sanderson striking Miss Paltrow or Miss Paltrow striking Mr. Sanderson and falling to the ground, there's only one scenario that would account for enough force application to fracture those ribs, and that would be Miss Paltrow striking Mr. Sanderson from behind and then falling on top of him down towards the right side onto the right side of his torso.
So you did consider the possibility that Terry could have hit Miss Paltrow?
Well, yes, I considered a number of different scenarios. Not only that, but the possibility of a rotational effect both ways. Terry Sanderson striking Miss Paltrow from behind and then rotating in such a way to the ground. Could that account for the rib injuries, and vice versa? Miss Paltrow striking Mr. Sanderson from behind and rotating, you know, in such a way. I took those into consideration, and those were eliminated for a number of reasons. But the biggest one is it takes a half a second to fall to the ground, and to rotate in such a way that you strike your ribs onto the ground over your elbow would indicate that, let's say that Mr. Sanderson struck Miss Paltrow from behind and rotated, and she fell on top of him as a result of the rotational effect. Mr. Sanderson would have had to generate the initial rotational force to cause that rotation in order for him to land beneath Miss Paltrow. Okay, and then in so doing, he would have landed on his back. Now keep in mind that if you're going to rotate 180 degrees in less than half a second, that's basically a rotational rate of between 360 and 400 degrees per second. Now, having dealt with athletes all my life, I've dealt with swimmers or divers. Divers have a difficult time even generating that type of rotational rate when they do their complex dives. So Mr. Sanderson certainly would not be able to generate that rotational component and land underneath Miss Paltrow. Then vice versa, if Miss Paltrow struck Mr. Sanderson from behind and rotated around, then that would have been at an even more increased rotational rate for Mr. Sanderson to be underneath Miss Paltrow for those ribs to fracture. And then again, more likely than not, he would have landed on his back and not his side. And then the last consideration is they both had their skis on. To be able to do that type of rotation, you would expect skis to come off, and they didn't. So that was kind of the analysis I did with regards to rotational effects. Keep in mind that it's a very, very short period of time between contact and striking the ground.
So you're saying it's nearly impossible that Terry Sanderson hit Miss Paltrow to cause this ski crash?
Well, yes, I mean, I went through all of those scenarios, unless there is some other descriptor that I am not aware of and did not take into consideration. The only possible way would have been Ms. Paltrow striking Mr. Sanderson with the eye.
So you're saying this hit from behind is about the only way his ribs could have broken the way they did?
Yes.
So you're saying from a physics standpoint, Terry's injuries would not have occurred if he had hit Miss Paltrow and skied between her skis, for example?
The mere fact of him just striking her, that's not enough energy being transferred to the ribs to result in the rib fracture. And neither is Ms. Paltrow striking Terry from behind. That contact in of itself is not going to result in rib fracture. It's the actual landing on the ground that resulted in the rib fracture.
So the ribs and the way they were fractured are a clear sign that Terry Sanderson was hit from behind.
Yes, I mean, that's what my analysis points to. And like I said before, I analyzed different scenarios and took that into consideration as well.
Including the theory of the rotation?
Yes, I did that as well. And there is just no way it could have happened in any other scenario, if you will, other than being struck from behind on the left side, driving your center of gravity to the right, resulting in the fall to the ground to the right side.
Okay, we've been going almost an hour, or about an hour. Why don't we take a short break and continue after the break? Thank you.
Okay, go on record. The time is 1:10. Okay, back on record. The time is 1:28.
Dr. Boehm, why don't you tell the jury about the concussion that Terry suffered in this ski crash? As a practicing neurologist, what are the typical symptoms of a concussion?
Well, the most common one is headache. And then you can have any number of other symptoms to include disorientation, confusion, not interacting correctly, some irritation, that kind of stuff. And now, obviously, if you have more severe injuries, you can actually have like paralysis, loss of vision, these types of things. But suffice it to say, the most common is a headache, and followed by a number of other things that may or may not accompany the headache.
Yeah, based on what you've read and what you've seen in your exam, did Terry have some of these symptoms?
Yes, he did, and he reported those to me, which were consistent with the medical records, and so I had no reason to refute that, but I would certainly defer all those findings to his treaters.
Could you tell the jury, do you think Terry was malingering, magnifying, or faking any of his symptoms?
He didn't appear that way to me, no.
Okay, returning to the concussion, I've got a model here. brain, and you can see that. Can you tell the jury how a concussion occurs, such as the one Terry suffered in this crash?
Well, a concussion results from the application or a blow to the head in layman's terms, basically an externally applied force application that gets transferred to the brain. You can appreciate that, excuse me for just 1 second. I have one of these too.
Okay.
You can appreciate that the brain lies within the skull table. This is the skull, and that's the hardest bone that we have. But the brain is not hard like bone. It's like a gelatinous, if you were able to ever to hold one, it's like a Jello with stuff, you know, carrot sticks or whatever in there. You know, it's a unique consistency, if you will. And so, and I'm talking about a live brain because as part of my residency, we did do brain surgery. So the brain is very, what we call friable, soft, and so it moves, okay? It's a fluid. And so if your head moves or your skull moves, the brain will move into the opposite direction and then have a tendency to rebound back to the other side. And that's based on Newton's first and third law as well. The first law being an object will remain at rest or in constant motion unless acted upon by an externally applied force. And then the third law is for every force application, there's an equal and opposite force application. And so the brain is going to move in opposite direction of the skull. So it's going to make contact with that, with the bony table within the skull. So it's going to compress, then expand, and then compress again. So the French refer to that as a coup, contre coup type of situation. So you can actually get injury from that. And so if you fall face forward, down, the brain is going to compress downwards and then rebound backwards. So you can see that the front part of the brain, and you can appreciate that underneath here, you got all these complex bony structures. So the bottom part of the brain is going to be exposed to that sudden change in direction as well. So you can have symptoms, any number of symptoms from that. So if you have frontal lobe issues, you can have executive dysfunctioning, motivational issues, you can have behavioral issues, and then the subcortical or the underneath side of the brain, you can have memory issues, that kind of stuff. So, and then you can appreciate that all parts of the brain are kind of interconnected, okay? So you can have issues from those interconnecting fibers being affected as well. So that's what the externally applied force application does to the skull that is transferred to the brain.
Okay. So this these forces that the brain is coup contre coup or sloshing around in the skull, that's my term. Did something like that happen to Terry?
Well, yes. I mean, whenever you have a force application, the possibility, certainly you have the coup, which is the direct hit, and then you can have rebounding as well. And you don't know whether you get injury from one or the other. It's generally thought that the contre coup injury tends to be more severe in most individuals, but that's not always the case. But suffice to say, if you have 240 newtons of impact force to the brain, that's certainly enough to cause some dysfunction of the brain. Now, does it guarantee dysfunction? No, no. You can't, and what I'm saying here is just because you're exposed to an externally applied force to the head of 240 newtons doesn't guarantee brain injury. You have to clinically correlate that with the patient's medical records and the patient himself. So that has to be done first before you go back and do the calculation to see if the force application was proper in both direction and magnitude to result in those injuries.
So when you say clinically correlated, does that, how does that affect your opinions?
Well, I will tell you this, you don't have any opinions if you don't have clinical correlation. You see what I'm saying? Without the medical aspect of this, you don't know. If someone came up to me and said, well, this person was exposed to 240 newtons of impact force against his head, what's his diagnosis? Well, I couldn't tell you. Not without knowing what the symptoms are, and in the case if that patient has medical records, then you want to peruse the medical records to see how his symptoms progressed over time and how they did not respond to different treatment paradigms that were offered to the patient. So clinical correlation is absolutely critical in assessing these types of situations.
And there was clinical correlation that you observed or saw or determined yourself?
Well, yes, I looked at the medical records, and upon questioning Mr. Sanderson in my office on April 28, 2021, he corroborated the medical records. So he was consistent with the medical records. So I had no reason to dispute either him or the medical records.
Would you say his head injury or concussive injury is permanent at this point?
Well, that has always been the issue here, you know, whether or not the concussion is permanent or temporary. The fact that his symptoms have lasted from a neurological sense greater than 18 months, we regard that as being permanent. And you can see that as of 6 years after the event when I saw him, he still had these symptoms. So his symptoms have been indicative of a permanent condition.
A permanent brain injury?
Yes, I mean, he has a mild TBI or a permanent concussive disorder.
Okay. You mentioned some things involved with executive function and other things, and he's exhibited all of those problems too.
Yeah, I mean, he does. Now, to what extent, I can't tell you. I wasn't going to provide any opinions with regards to his level of functioning as it relates to this mild TBI, but he does have the mild TBI, but the extent to which I'm not going to comment on because I'm not one of his treating physicians, nor am I one of his before and after witnesses.
In this collision, how would you explain that Ms. Paltrow has fewer symptoms of problems, if at all, from this ski crash?
Well, first of all, I haven't reviewed any medical records for Ms. Paltrow, so I do not, I cannot opine on that, other than by falling on top of him, he provides a cushioning effect against her in the ground. So from a force application, an externally applied force application standpoint, less force was applied to her than to him.
So is another way of saying Terry Sanderson provided a cushion? He took the force for her fall?
Yeah, in essence, I mean, basically he was like a cushion, if you will.
And earlier we discussed before and after witnesses being clinically important for a diagnosis of concussion and TBI. That's lasted longer than 18 months. How would you describe these before and after witnesses, such as his daughters or his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend?
Well, they certainly describe a change in his overall makeup from before and after this event. Now, how it affects him directly, once again, I'm going to defer to others for that, but certainly there is before and after witness testimony reflecting that.
And those before and after witnesses are important to determine the nature and extent of his injuries?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, like I said before, whenever you have this type of situation or this type of patient that presents to you, often it is the witnessed account that is important.
Let's talk about Terry's pre-existing medical condition. It's been brought up in that one exhibit with the x-rays or radiology that was reported shortly after the crash, within a few days, that he had NPA and enlarged ventricles. You recall that, correct?
Yes, NPH.
Or, sorry, NPH. I wrote it wrong. My spelling was incorrect. NPH. What is the significance of NPH being a condition he had prior to the crash, and how it affects your opinions today? If you could explain that to the jury.
Normal pressure hydrocephalus is a condition that is manifested clinically by a triad: dementia, ataxia, which means loss of balance, and incontinence. And it develops slowly over time. And we see this from a radiological standpoint as enlarged ventricles on either the CT scan, but more appropriately the MRI. And so when you see this in that clinical setting, then you want to do one of two things, or preferably both. You do a spinal tap to see if you have increased intracranial pressure on the spinal tap, and we have manometers that we attach to the needle going into the back to measure that pressure in millimeters of water. And if it is elevated, i.e. greater than 200 millimeters of water, then the treatment of choice is to actually do a burr hole in the head and stick a catheter into the lateral ventricle, and then trace a drain all the way down through the neck into his stomach, if you will, abdomen, to drain off excess spinal fluid, i.e. reducing the pressure. And we call that an interventricular shunt placement, which I have done a number of times in the past. And so that is the treatment for it. But you don't want to do that unless you don't do it based on just the radiological findings. You want to have the clinical. Any intracranial image has to be clinically correlated with the patient. So if you don't have those symptoms, then you don't want to be putting holes in people's heads without having symptoms. So in this particular case, he did not have the diagnosis of normal pressure hydrocephalus before this fall, even though he had a suggestion of that in the differential from a radiological standpoint. So that's where the clinical correlation comes into play.
So he did not have the 3 clinical symptoms of NPH, is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, dementia, ataxia, and incontinence are pretty noteworthy symptoms to have, and these people tend to present as they develop over time. They tend to present to medical attention rather quickly, if you know what I mean.
Okay. So the ski crash injuries he suffered, they're not attributable to his findings radiologically of NPH. Is that correct?
That's correct. No, they're not.
Now, I'd like to turn you to the defense experts. You've read some or all of, I think most of the reports of the defense experts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Some of them were quite brief, isn't that correct?
Well, yes, in fact, I do like brevity, but yes, they got to the point.
Okay. And you've reviewed the...
Sorry, Lawrence. Sorry, Lawrence. I don't mean to interrupt. I'm trying to figure out a good time to interrupt here, but I just want to register an objection to any opinions that Dr. Bain could have provided in his deposition and did not. And you can proceed.
Okay. Well, since your deposition, you've reviewed the defendant's disclosure of Irving Scher. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, just the disclosure. I haven't reviewed any report or anything from them.
Okay. It's our understanding that he's a biomechanical expert. Is that your understanding?
Well, that's what's been told to me.
Sounds like we're getting into a new area. That would be a good time to take a recess until tomorrow at 9 a.m. So thank you. Remember to please keep the court's admonition not to do any of your own research, not to discuss the case with anyone, avoid seeing, reading, or listening to any news reports about the case. Have a nice evening.
On the record, we had a bench conference. I wanted to ask Polly Gresham questions about her sister, Jenny Sanderson. And what I would have elicited, had I been allowed, is that Jenny has a schizophrenic, I think it's called typal, T-Y-P-A-L diagnosis, and has a lot of psychological problems from that. Now, I'm not posing her as an expert, but as a layperson who knows her very well and knows the kind of problems that she has.
I have a concern with this being nationally publicized without the permission of this patient, with a pretty explosive statement that I've never seen one iota of evidence. I don't think